Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host Tom D'Ambra. We hope that you've gotten to see some of our earlier broadcasts, so you have a foundation of the information that we presented to you as we go on this journey of knowledge. Some things I just want to go over briefly. We have established through historical documentation, quotes of the people involved in the different areas that we've discussed, and also from case law, that the most important thing that I wish to demonstrate, and we have demonstrated, is the fact that the Federal Reserve is not a federal agency. As we discussed, the name was put in deceitfully by a gentleman by the name of Paul Warburg out of Germany. He was actually known as the father of the Federal Reserve System here in the United States. We spoke how he wanted to use the word federal so that people would believe it was under the federal auspices, and also the reserve, because they knew all along that their plan was to confiscate the wealth of the country, the gold and the silver of the country, and so they wanted to have the word reserve in there so that people would think that there actually would be a reserve. And we have demonstrated to you that there is no reserve, and that actually there is nothing. The money, what we call money today, is actually a fiat currency. So with that being said, we also got into the foreign corporations, the people, the banks that actually control and own the Federal Reserve banking system. We've also discussed the bankruptcy of the corporation that we call the government, and how that has affected us to some degree. It affects us every day. When I say some degree, I mean that we have not touched on all of the basis yet of the repercussions of giving the control of our monetary system to a foreign corporate entity. So let's go on with that. I just want to do a quick background with you in case you weren't able to see our previous shows. So when we left last week, we were just discussing an instrument called the Banker's Manifesto of 1892. Now, this was written, I actually got this, folks, from the Congressional Record, which was based, you can get online and you can look this up yourselves. And as we always reiterate, we want you to go online. We want you to research. Don't take our word for what we're presenting to you. Please do the research yourself. And as a matter of fact, when you do the research yourself, we are just skimming the top of the iceberg, if you would, with regards to the information that we're presenting, because for time's sake, we would be here for months on end on just one subject. So please take the time and do the research for yourselves. So again, we were discussing the Banker's Manifesto of 1892. I did get this from the Congressional Record. This was revealed to the Congress by United States Congressman Charles A. Lindbergh Sr. He was a congressman from Minnesota. He's actually the father of the famed aviator Charles Lindbergh Jr. But this is a manifesto, if you would, when the international bankers were organizing, and this was what their manifesto, their plan, their guide, if you would, of what they were going to accomplish. We, the bankers, must proceed with caution and guard every move made. For the lower order of people, folks, who do you think they're concerning the lower order of people? That's you and I. Are already showing signs of restless commotion. Prudence will therefore show a policy of apparently yielding to the popular will until our plans are so far consummated that we can declare our designs without fear of any organized resistance. The Farmers Alliance and Knights of Labor organizations in the United States should be carefully watched by our trusted men, and we must take immediate steps to control these organizations in our interest or disrupt them. At the coming of the Omaha Convention, to be held this July 4th in 1892, our men must attend and direct its movements, or else there will be set on foot such antagonism to our designs as may require force to overcome. This, at the present time, would be premature. We are not yet ready for such a crisis. Capital must protect itself in every possible manner through the combination of conspiracy and legislation. The courts must be called to our aid. Debts must be collected. Bonds and mortgages foreclosed as rapidly as possible. When through the process of the law, the common people have lost their homes, they will be more tractable and easily governed through the influence of a strong arm of the government applied to a central power of imperial wealth under the control of the leading financiers. People without homes will not quarrel with their leaders. History repeats itself in regular cycles. This truth is well known among our principal men who are engaged in forming an imperialism of the world. While they are doing this, the people must be kept in a state of political antagonism. The question of tariff reform must be argued through the organization known as the Democratic Party. The question of protectionism with the reciprocity of must be forced to the view through the Republican Party. By thus dividing the voters, we can get them to expand their energies in fighting over questions of no importance to us, except as teachers to the common herd. Folks, who do you think the common herd is? Thus, by discrete action, we can secure all that has been so generously planned and successfully accomplished. This statement was not supposed to be made to the public, obviously. Again, like I said, Charles Lindbergh, congressman from Minnesota, brought this forth to the congressional record. But let's break this statement down. First, we the bankers. We the bankers. Understand, folks, again, Federal Reserve, private foreign entity. We must proceed with caution and guard every move made. Well, I think Rockefeller said it the best when he said that when he gave thanks to the Washington Post and the New York Times and the media in this country, he gave them thanks because, as to use his own words, they could not stand the exposure of light. In other words, they had to do all this in secrecy, behind closed doors, and they had to have the puppets, if you would, through the government, through the media. They had to have them directing your energies on wasteful tasks, things that really have had no leniency, or they had no effect on their plans. So in other words, you know, they have you looking over here to the right when their actions are really over here to the left. Also, they said prudence will therefore show a policy of apparently yielding to our popular will until our plans are so far consummated that we can declare our designs without fear of any organized resistance. I found this very interesting, and I'll tell you the reason why. I have been studying these people since 1979, and I will tell you that up to, say, 10 years ago, this being 2009, you could not find anything on the Council on Foreign Relations. You couldn't find anything on the Trilateralist Commission, the Bilderberg people, all these different organizations, the Bank of International Settlements and so forth. But you see, what they've done is they've had their accumulation crisis, as Albert Pike called it. And now we talked about the Hegelian dialect before, you know, create the problem, get the reaction from the people that they're looking for, and then go forward with the solution. Well, they've created the crisis, obviously the wars, the economies in a free fall, the devaluation of what we call the dollar, which we're going to get into, which is not a dollar. So now to present themselves as the saviors, they have to introduce themselves. So they're not denying anymore there's a new world order, or as Henry Kissinger called it just 2 weeks ago on public television, a new world economic order. See, if they don't present themselves, how do you know? You would never know they're the saviors. You know, you can't believe in something you don't see, especially the American people. So they deny, they create the crisis, they get the reaction from you, and now for them to present themselves as the saviors, they have to present themselves, period. So this is why they've come forward with openly about the New World Order. And what does this tell you about the timetable? If they've achieved everything that they've wanted to achieve before they brought us into this free fall, and before they introduced themselves, and before they took ultimate control. Very, very important that you understand that this is the time period that we are currently at. The Farmers Alliance and Knights of Labor organizations in the United States should be carefully watched by our trusted men. Folks, these are old-time, what we would know in modern-day language as union. They're a guild, and what a guild is they actually are an organization or an association formed by people in a certain trade, this one being the farmers, obviously, that they want to control these organizations. They want to direct these organizations, and they want to do it subvertly. They want to do it through inside and outside influence, but it's all done behind closed doors. Now, if these organizations don't go along with them, and we'll quote again, and we must take immediate steps to control these organizations in our interest or disrupt them. In other words, if you're not going to go along with their plan, you're not going to go along with what they have laid down in front of us, then they're going to disrupt your organization so much that, number one, you may physically fall apart, but at least the public perception of you will be one that the people won't have any faith in you. Its members won't have any faith in you. You lose membership, and without membership, you have no power. You have no influence. At the coming Omaha Convention on July 4th, 1892, so folks, how long has this battle been going on? Of course, we talked about this battle's been going on for centuries, but this document right here is from 1892. Our men must attend and direct its movements, or else there will be set on foot such antagonism to our designs as we may require force to overcome. And what they're basically saying here is that, again, they're going to do this through deception. They're going to do this to the point that instead of, we talked about in other shows, they've gotten very smart. It's no longer the tip of the barrel of the gun that they're going to present this to you. They're going to make you desire their authority. They're going to save you. They're going to make you want all this. You know, this is all being done for your own good. So at present time would be premature. Again, because in 1892, folks, they hadn't accomplished all of the mechanisms, all the avenues that they needed to be lined out to accomplish their goal. And we're going to get into exactly what their goal is very soon. The courts must be called to our aids. Debts must be collected, bonds and mortgages foreclosed as rapidly as possible. Now think of this. The courts must be called to our aid. Folks, we're going to do a very good presentation in future shows on the courts in the United States. And I don't want to digress, but I'm going to be very quick with this. We all heard of an association called the Bar, the American Bar Association. Well, the Bar literally stands for American British Accreditation Registry. That's correct. The Bar is a foreign entity. It's a private entity. And it also, notice where it came from. It comes from Britain. We talked about the origination of the Federal Reserve banking system, the people behind it and so forth, where they originate from. Europe, but particularly the Rothschilds out of Britain. So again, remember what Baron Rothschild said, give me control of a nation's currency, I care not who makes its laws. Well, the reason being, folks, is because if I have the print machine behind me, I'm going to control every aspect of that entity, whether it's a private corporation, a government corporation, an NGO, whichever, it doesn't matter. I am printing the money. I am going to have complete control of all aspects of that corporation. And that's exactly what they're saying here. Let me read that again to you. The courts must be called to our aid. So are the courts upholding constitutional common law? No. Today we're in a statutory democracy, okay? And a foreign guild called the British Accreditation Registry actually controls our courts. The judges know this. Don't go yelling at your attorney. And by the way, let's break down the word attorney to attorn, to separate one from one's property. And another, if you want to take the language a step farther, look at what all attorneys are called in this country. Esquires, a title of British nobility, and that's where the word comes from. That's why they're called esquires, because their allegiance is to the British Guild. Please, take the time to look that up. And if you want to really get upset, folks, or you want to go take the next step down the rabbit hole, take a look at the original 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, because you could not hold public office and hold title of nobility. 92% of the people up at the Congress and the Senate, the House of Representatives and the Senate, guess what they are? Attorneys. Why do you think the Founding Fathers put that in? Because they didn't want any of our representatives to have an allegiance to a foreign entity. And this is, again, this is how they got the courts to come to their aid. And this is how, in 1933, when the corporation we call the government went bankrupt, this is how they actually changed the law system of this country. We are not a constitutional republic anymore. We do not have common law. I have been in court. I have heard judges say to one gentleman, one more word of the Constitution from you and I will hold you in contempt. So, debts must be collected, bonds and mortgages foreclosed as rapidly as possible. You got to understand, folks, in 1892, debts must be collected because our currency still had what? It had intrinsic value. There was still gold and silver backing it up. They wanted to rake all this in. They wanted to, collect the debts. Today, we couldn't collect the debts, and we're going to get into that because there'd be no money in circulation because our money is based on debt. So they were looking to regain everything that was out there with regards to intrinsic value. Bonds and mortgages foreclosed as rapidly as possible. Again, when you break down the word mortgage, we talked about this in earlier shows, it comes from French law. It literally means death pledge. So they wanted to collect all this. They wanted the mortgages foreclosed on because they wanted to get all the gold and silver in, and they wanted to put the people in a state of despair. And again, they wanted to have the people in a state of despair so they can, there's the problem, get the reaction, and create the solution. And of course, the solution will always be a betterment to the people who created the problem. So went through the process of law, back to the courts, foreign guild. The common people, you and I, have lost their homes, our homes. And what was that quote that we had from Jefferson? If the American people ever allow the bankers to control the issuance of their currency, the bankers and the corporations that will grow up around them, first through inflation and then through deflation, their children will wake up homeless on the continent their forefathers conquered. Think of them words when you look at what's going around you today. The common people have lost their homes. They will be more tractable and easily governed through the influence of the strong arm of the government applied to a central power of imperial wealth under the control of the leading financiers, the bankers. Okay, the bankers are going to, they're setting this up, folks, so that the bankers are going to be in control of everything. And I do mean everything. You can run the gamut of the functions of the government, and you're going to see that folks, all we do is elect officials to an insolvent corporation. All right? And if I want to keep this business going, I need credit from these bankers that I'm insolvent to. Very simple. So am I going to, if I'm the corporation, am I going to answer to you, the stockholders and voters? Or am I going to answer to the creditors, the bankers behind me? Obviously, if I want to keep this flowing, I have to pay attention to the people behind me, the bankers. So what they do is we have a nice little dog and pony show, a magic show as someone once called it, and they have this little dog and pony show. They put these puppets up there to lead you down the road that the bankers want you to be led down. And that's why these crazy agreements like NAFTA and GATT and CAFTA, all these free trade agreements, this is how they come into play. You know, you take like General Motors right now. We're giving them billions of dollars, and supposedly they're shutting operations down. Well, the only thing they're shutting down, folks, is North American operations. They're moving their headquarters to Brazil. They've just facilitated two new factories in Brazil, one in Vietnam and a major one in China. Okay? You finance that. Your children are financing that. They come up with these great names for these bills, and one that comes to my mind is the Freedom to Farm Act. Well, when you read the legislation of that, and when it took place, it destroyed the family farmer, the Patriot Act. Okay? You start studying the Patriot Act, which we're going to do at some future show, and you'd be shocked at what you're going to discover. And you're also going to discover who this act was meant to address. It's not meant to address, Osama bin Forgotten, who was supposedly in a cave, but the guy needs dialysis every 9 days. I mean, that's just beautiful, but that's the show for another time. But you got to understand, folks, that they have this dog and pony show. Right now we have a puppet of a different shade for the American people to Google that. He's going to lead us to the utopia, okay? What's happened since this new president's been in? There's been change. The bankers have gotten $14.6 trillion. We're deeper in debt. Now they're coming up with a domestic security force. You got to understand, folks, this is all being directed against you. And in future shows, we're going to get into Senate Document 93-549, where we're going to demonstrate to you, and please go on the internet. Punch in Senate Document 93-549, go on the internet, and you will see who the United States government in 1933 declared to be the enemy of the United States government. You're going to be shocked, but guess who it was? It's you, the herd, the common people. So, went through the process of law. The common people have lost their homes. They'll be more tractable, easily governed through the influence of the strong arm of the government applied to a central power of imperial wealth under the control of leading financiers. People without homes will not quarrel with their leaders. Yeah, and history will demonstrate that quite well to you. History repeats itself in regular cycles. This truth is well known among our principal men who are engaged in forming an imperialism of the world. Folks, this is their own language. This is a communication amongst the members of this cabal. What is their mission criteria? They are engaged in forming an imperialism of the world. While they are doing this, the people must be kept in a state of political antagonism. Now, how do they do that? They divide us. We're pro-choice. No, we're not pro-choice, right? Right? Think how they divide us. Think of all the different ways. They divide us through race. They divide us through social status. They divide us through, you know, you're left, you're right, you're liberal, you're conservative. You know, I mean, it just goes on and goes on and goes on, the different mechanisms that they use to divide us. Because, you know, as the song says, if we ever formed together, we would be turned into a monster. Well, the monster, folks, would be against the people who were orchestrating all this despair throughout our country. Now, when you get into there's different, I don't want to digress more, but when you get into the bankruptcy of our country, you know, they confiscated all the gold and silver, they put a lien against the public trust, and then they formulated a thing called the birth certificate. And we're going to do an in-depth study in the birth certificate in future shows, but I want you to think about this. The birth certificate goes to an agency called the Department of Commerce. What is the task of the Department of Commerce? Financial transactions. The record of birth goes to the health department. That's the flesh and blood you. Just want you to think about that for future thought. Okay, so then now we go on that, yeah, they're going to keep us in political antagonism. The question of tariff reform must be urged to the organization known as the Democratic Party. The question of protection to the Republican Party. Folks, what are they telling you? The Democratic Party, the Republican Party, number one, are answering to these bankers. They're controlled by the bankers. They're financed by the bankers. And they're a divide tool. They're part of the divide paradigm. Again, left, right, conservative, liberal. You know, this is what they do. You know, so if you can't focus on the real problems, if you can't focus on the mechanisms that are being used against you because your ideology blocks you, you can't think outside the cage, you can't think outside the box, you can't even see and or accept what is staring you in the face in front of you, all because of the divide paradigm, and they lock you into this ideology. Well, I can't be interested in this person. I'm not even going to listen to what this person says because this person's a Democrat. Or this person can't be right. He must be a wacko because he's a Republican. You have got to stop thinking in terms of left and right. You've got to start analyzing history, facts that are all around you, what you're using for a currency, what you're not using for a currency. You've got to start thinking about who's controlling your school systems, who's controlling your health, who's controlling your law, who's controlling your money, and who's not controlling your health and your law and your money. You're not controlling it. And we've got to get it back to the point, if we're going to turn this around like presidential candidate Ron Paul said, the American people have got to gain control of their money system first. So thus, by dividing the voters, we can get them to expand their energies in fighting over questions of no importance to us, except as teachers to the common herd. Thus, by discrete action, we can secure all that has been so generously planned and successfully accomplished. I think them words speak for themselves, although some words that do jump out to me is the common herd. The common herd is you and I. Now, this Banker's Manifesto is of 1934. And what it is, folks, is you're gonna find it's a condensed version of the one of 1892. You're going to find some redundancy in its language because the first one was written so well, and it's plainly stated what they were looking to do. So let's go with this. Capital must protect itself in every way. Capital, is them, okay, through the combination and through legislation. There you go again. So now we've already established that the courts are working for them. Now our legislators, our supposed representatives, who are they representing? They're looking, again, all these free trade agreements. They're looking out for the interests of the bankers. Debts must be collected and loans and mortgages foreclosed as soon as possible. When through the process of the law the common people have lost their homes, they will be more tractable and more easily governed through the strong arm of the law applied by a central power of wealth. Again, controlled by the leading finances, wealth. Okay? Again, it's pretty redundant. Some of this stuff is people without homes will not quarrel with their leaders. They talked about earlier how people with their homes are more tractable and more easily governed. Well, now they're saying flat out that they're not even going to quarrel with the leaders. Okay, this is well known among our principal men now engaged in forming our imperialism of capital to govern the world. Before they were engaged in it. They were beginning the whole process to create this process to come to this end, to come to the conclusion of what they were looking to do. Well, now they're telling you that it's actively going on. Okay? They are engaged in it. We are actively pursuing this. We have set our trusted men out, as they call them, into these different agencies, both government and non-government, to accomplish this. Okay? Again, by dividing the people, we can get them to expand their energies in fighting over questions which of no importance, except to us as teachers of the common herd. And again, some redundancy in their language, but it brings home to the point of exactly where they are. Now, that was in 1934, folks. Where are we in 2009? So when we go back and look at some of the history of money in our country, we had that very famous quote from Ben Franklin. I think it was our first or second show where he plainly stated that the reasoning for the revolution, the battle of the War of Independence against Great Britain, was the fact that the king would not allow them to issue their own interest-free money. It had nothing to do with a 2% tax on tea. It had nothing to do, with some of the Stamp Act and things like that. Don't get me wrong, they were little nails in a little coffin, but the main cause to get the people to take arms against their mother country was the fact that the king would not allow them to issue currency interest-free away from the Bank of England. They wanted to have control of their own currency. People were very educated in them days. They had a classical education with regards to history and theology and all the things that we don't get anymore. The only history we get today, folks, and I'll sum it up with a famous quote that was by Napoleon Bonaparte when he said, "History is agreed upon lies by the victors." Well, that's what we get today. They're not going to teach you in the public school system about, how on December 23rd, 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was put into play while the Congress was away for the Christmas holiday. They're not going to teach you any of that. They're not going to teach you that we have a fractional banking system and a fiat currency. They're not going to teach you that you're bonding your children to the IMF through a thing called a birth certificate. They're not going to teach you that the difference between a certificate and a note. They're not going to teach you that. What they are going to teach you is that they're going to keep you dumbed down. They're going to keep you in a state of ignorance. They're going to keep you in a state of, just like they said, antagonism. They want you thinking over here. They don't want you focused on the real concerns and the real remedies to turn this problem around. So let's get into, again, some quotes on the Federal Reserve, which we've done earlier, and money itself. Okay. This, folks, is a booklet I highly recommend to everybody. I'm hoping you can see that. But it's a little booklet, and it's a copy from the Congressional Record of the different coinage and mintage acts of the United States. Very, very interesting. But they open it up with a very interesting quote from John Adams in 1787. "Of all the perplexities, confusion, and distress in America that arise, not from defects in the Constitution or our Confederation, not for want of honor or virtue, so much as from the downright ignorance of the nature of coin, credit, and circulation. Nothing new under the sun." What was that quote we had from Henry Ford? "If the American people ever understood their money system, I fear there would be revolution by morning." Absolutely. So let's get into some quotes from some people in history here. And one of them, one of my favorite presidents, Andrew Jackson, he actually defeated the bank. He got that was the War of 1812 was about that, and he defeated the central bank. But listen to his quote: "The distress and sufferings inflicted on the people by the banks are some of the fruits of the system of the policy which is continually striving to enlarge the authority of the federal government." Why are they trying to enlarge? Now think of where the federal government was. This is 1837 compared to where it is today. We've run out of alphabetical acronyms to describe all the different agencies within our government. You know, the federal government is supposed to be involved in three things, folks: Treasury, Defense, and Judicial. That was it. The federal government was not supposed to be involved in your lives. The federal government was not supposed to be in housing, education, all the rest of it. Judicial, Treasury, and Defense. That's it. Okay? This is how much they've usurped power from you and from the states. You have already had an abundant evidence of the banking institution's power to inflict injury upon the agricultural, mechanical, and laboring classes of our society. Andrew Jackson, 1837. Now, this is from Sir Joseph Stamp, President of the Bank of England. Folks, this is the second richest man in the world, second only to the Rothschild. Banking was conceived in inequity and born in sin. Bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave them the power to create money, and with a flick of a pen, they will create enough money to buy it back again. Take this great power away from them, and all the great fortunes like mine will disappear, and they ought to disappear, for then this would be a better and happier world to live in. But if you want to continue to be the slaves of the bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, then let the bankers continue to create money and control credit." What goes on in this country today? Who controls the issuance of currency? Who controls the value thereof? Now, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 10 of the Constitution, as we described in earlier shows, mandates that Congress has this responsibility to do this and the ability to do this. But a private foreign bank called the Federal Reserve has usurped that power from the representatives of the people. Thomas Jefferson: "I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. Already they have raised up a money ascocity that has set the government at defiance. The issuing power of money should be taken from the banks and restored to the people to whom it belongs." That would end our problems right now, guys. "The issue which has swept down through the centuries and which will have to be fought sooner or later is the people versus the bankers." Lord Acton, Chief Justice of England in 1875. Folks, the reason why I'm here in front of this camera, and the reason why the people behind this camera are doing this, is because I am personally convinced that we are at that apex. We are at that time where if our way of life, if the prosperity of the future of this nation and of the peoples of the world are to remain with any kind of grasp of their own power, the time is here now where we have to regain the control, the issuance of our currency. Let me read that quote back to you one more time. "The issue which has swept down through the centuries and which will have to be fought sooner or later is the people versus the bankers." Lord Acton, Chief Justice of England. Think of the words there. "I had never thought that the Federal Reserve would prove such a failure. The country is in a state of irreversible bankruptcy." Senator Carter Glass, June 7th, 1938. Folks, the Federal Reserve banking system wasn't a failure. The Federal Reserve banking system has accomplished everything that it was intended to accomplish by the people who organized it and implemented it. Now, this is Salmon P. Chase. He was Secretary of the Treasury to Abraham Lincoln. We did get into a little bit about the greenbacks with Abraham Lincoln, but listen to what he has to say. "My agency in promoting the passage of the National Banking Act was the greatest financial mistake of my life. It has built up a monopoly which affects every interest in the country. It should be repealed, but before that can be accomplished, the people will be arrayed on one side and the bankers on the other, in a contrast such as we have never seen before in this country." No greater words have been spoken, because that's exactly, you've got to understand that's exactly what it is. It's us against them. And again, I know most of you can't fathom that because you think the Federal Reserve is part of the government, and you think the government is a benevolent organization, you know, here to protect you. No, they're not. Again, Senate Document 93-549. Please go on the internet and punch that in. I think you'll be shocked at what you read. So let's get into what we have for currency and what we don't. there are different aspects of history, and again, for time's sake, we're not going to get into all that with this show. But let's just get some quotes from the founding era and on within this country. This is a letter from George Washington to James Madison. Now, James Madison, I don't know if you've ever read the Anti-Federalist Papers, or the Federalist Papers, either one. Very, very in-depth thinking man. These bills of credit. See, when they talk about paper money, folks, bills of credit is a note, an acknowledgement of debt, a promise to pay. A certificate holds intrinsic value. And a certificate has something that, number one, it's a negotiable instrument, and it holds intrinsic value. You could go to that bank at one point and get your 1 ounce of gold or ounce of silver, okay? And we have some here, and we're going to show you the difference in the language. These paper bills of credit and such things are extremely hurtful and may be reckoned among the principal sources of the evils and corruption of the present day, and this too without accomplishing the object in view. For if we mean to be honest, debts and taxes must be paid with the substance and not with shadow. In other words, Washington's telling you that to keep everything to where it's manageable and recognizable to the people, debts and taxes must be paid in substance, not the shadow. The substance is intrinsic value, okay? The shadow is the facade. It's the fiat currency. It's the note. This is also a letter written from Washington to the citizens of Rhode Island. Rhode Island has a very unique history with regards to what went on in the state of Rhode Island. But listen to part of his letter here. Paper money has had the effect in your state that it ever will have, to ruin commerce, to oppress the honest, and to open the door to every species of fraud and injustice. Are we not riddled in this country and in this government right now with fraud and injustice? Again, there is your base of it. There is your base of the mechanism used to accomplish this. This is Andrew Jackson's farewell address. Folks, if you ever want to do something interesting, read the farewell addresses from Washington all the way on down. A lot of times, like including Dwight Eisenhower and so forth, their farewell address, they'll be more honest than they were the entire term that they were holding office, because, you know, job's over, they've accomplished what they wanted for the bankers, for the controllers, and now they get to speak a little freely. Of course, Andrew Jackson, as we said, and we're going to do another show, has defeated the private banks, the foreign bankers. But listen to his farewell address, March 4th, 1837, excuse me. The Constitution of the United States unquestionably intended to secure the people's circulating medium of gold and silver. The paper system being founded on public confidence and having itself no intrinsic value, it is liable to great and sudden fluctuations, thereby rendering property insecure and the wages of labor unsteady and uncertain. Some of the evils which arise from this system of paper press will with particular hardship upon the class of society least able to bear it. The paper money system may be used as an engine to undermine your free institutions, and those who desire to engross all power in the hands of the few and to govern by corruption or force are aware of its power and prepared to employ it. The mischief springs from the power which the moneyed interest derives from a paper currency which they are able to control. Folks, what do we have today? What do we have today? And let's a couple more quotes, then we're going to show you what we have today. This is again James Madison speaking on the Constitution in Congress. The extension of the prohibition of bills of credit, paper money, must give pleasure to every citizen and probation to his love of justice and his knowledge of the true springs of public prosperity. The extension of the prohibition. In other words, they were not going to allow this. They were still going to maintain control of their own money system. Therefore, Madison is saying that, you know, everyone who has this love of justice and the knowledge of the true springs of public prosperity should be rejoiced in the fact that the Congress has done this, okay? This is Justice Story in 1788. Public as well as private credit was utterly prostrated. The fortunes of many individuals were destroyed, and those of all persons were greatly impaired by the rapid and unparalleled depression of the paper currency during this period. In truth, the history of paper currency, which during the Revolution was issued by Congress alone, is a full melancholy instruction. It is at once humiliating to our pride and disruptible to our national justice. Again, that's the fourth time that we've heard the word justice be involved with regards to paper currency. You see, folks, it's not just about, the value. It's the control. It's having the control of the issuance of the currency and the value thereof. And that's why them words were very particular with regards to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Daniel Webster, of all the contrivances for cheating the labor classes of mankind, none has been more effectual than what is deludes them with paper money. Folks, who's the working laboring class? Again, William Patterson, 1786, an increase of the paper money, if it to be a tender, will destroy what little credit is left, will bewildered conscience in the maze of dishonest speculation, and will turn vice into legal virtue, and will sanctify inequity in law. Again, the justice system. Again, Rothschild. Give me control of a nation's currency. I care not who makes its laws. Okay. Now, Thomas Jefferson was made in his journal. He talks about the species of gold and silver coin. Now, let's get into this. Species in gold and silver coin is the most perfect medium because it will preserve its own level. Because having intrinsic and universal value, it can never die in our hands, and it is the surest resource of reliance in time of war. The trifling economy of paper is as a cheap medium, or is a convenience for transmission, weighs nothing in opposition to the advantages of precious metals. Paper money is liable to be abused, has been, is, and forever will be abused in every country in which it is permitted. Again, folks, I'm not even going to reiterate on that because I think that Thomas Jefferson quite plainly speaks exactly about that. So let's get into a little bit more about the intrinsic value. Gold, having intrinsic value, is money and more. It is property, capital, and all other forms of money are titles to property. All of the forms of money now used, banknotes, checks, drafts, paper currency, bills of exchange, gold and silver only has the power in and of itself to pay debts because it is the only capital. When coin, gold or silver, passes from one person to another, actual property or capital passes and the transmission is final in nature. Now, this is the Legal Tender Act of Congress, Supreme Court of Indiana, 1864. We have seen that the legal tender paper clause is an authority to make in by direction forced loans. Paper is not necessary a proper medium for exchange. It is an act of despotic power to make paper a legal tender. The principal interference of government with the currency has been to debase it. No instance is on record of a nation having arrived at great wealth without the use of gold and silver. Nor is there, on the other hand, any instance of a nation endeavoring to supplant this natural money by the use of paper money, without involving itself in distress and embarrassment. Hence, we are clear that the paper legal tender law is not an incident of the power to coin money. No, the power is nowhere expressly given to Congress to make legal coin a legal tender. The power over the subject of legal tender is possessed by the states. What they were trying to say here, literally, again, gets back into having intrinsic value to maintain a constant value, okay? So, folks, what is a dollar? All right, we're going to get into a little bit of the Mintage Act of 1792. This was, basically, you got to understand, folks, that we work for, if you went back to definitions, we work for military scrip of a private foreign bank known as the Federal Reserve. And when you look at it, it says Federal Reserve note. What is a note? It's an acknowledgement of debt. It's an acknowledgement to pay in the future. So you must be thinking, well, if we're working for a note and it's a promise to pay in the future, there does hold some kind of intrinsic value. That's true. The problem being today is that we've gone into a fiat currency. In other words, our currency, it holds no intrinsic value, and we are forced to use it as money by decree, okay? So what was a gold from the Mintage Act of 1792? What was a dollar? I'm sorry. A dollar was to equal 25.8 grains of gold and a 15-to-1 ratio of silver. So what we mean by that is, if you went back, we did get into John F. Kennedy and some earlier things. We got into Mr. Kennedy with regards to the assassination and so forth. What we were looking to do here, folks, is I want you, and I'm hoping we can get this on the screen, I want you to take a look at the language of this. Number one, some things to jump out at you. It does not say note. It says certificate. So when we look up the word certificate like we have earlier, the word certificate literally means it holds intrinsic value. So when I'm going to go into the bank, okay, I'm going to go into this bank and I'm going to present this silver certificate. Now, folks, don't do this today. I actually had a lot of fun with a former employee of mine, and her mother had collected some of these, and we went up to a local bank, and we walked in and said, hey, you know, we're looking for our ounces of silver and gold. If you could have seen the face on the teller, it was quite amusing. Obviously, she had no understanding of what we were discussing or talking about. But the bank manager did, and he was a friendly fellow, very nice guy. His name was John, and he came up to me and said, Tom, you know, what are you raising at today? Well, he knew what we were getting at. There was no intrinsic value with our currency, but what this comes from between 1962 and 1963, and what took place was this. John Kennedy, through Executive Order 11110, very easy to remember, 2 11s and a 0, right? Well, please, look that up, okay? But what he did was, he was going to do away with the Federal Reserve Act. He understood who was controlling the country. He understood who was taking the country down the road that we were going on. So what he did is he did an audit of Fort Knox. He discovered there was no gold, and he discovered that there was a value, and I want to say that value was something in the area of $2.4 trillion worth of silver. And so what he did was he issued, just like Lincoln did, greenbacks, if you would. And the reason why they called them greenbacks, folks, was because the back of the paper, I'm sorry, is green. Okay, so the nickname for the people became greenbacks, and what they did was, this had intrinsic value. So, okay, because it says certificate. Don't forget, certificate means 2 things. 1, it's a negotiable instrument. 2, it holds intrinsic value. Okay, and it also means literally bearer use of. Someone's allowing me to use this, right? So this is what's taken place, is that we have this. I'm reading backwards here, but you know, we have, you know, $5. Well, number one, it is a dollar, and why is it a dollar, folks? Because it is a 15-to-1 ratio. It has of silver to gold, and it has intrinsic value. Okay, but you'll see redeemable, and let me just read this right out for you. $5 in silver payable to the bearer on demand. Okay, can you folks see that? To the bearer on demand. Remember I said certificate means bearer use of. Someone's allowing you to use this certificate for whatever value. Okay, well, here we are. You could have walked into your bank and accomplished the fact of proving intrinsic value by exchanging this certificate for silver currency, hard currency, intrinsic value. Okay? So what do we have today? And I'm hoping we can get this. I'm hoping we can get this on the screen. But what we have today, we have a thing called the Federal Reserve Note. And what's a note? We stated quite plainly earlier, an acknowledgement of debt. And it literally means a promise to pay, you know. Well, what do we have? Okay, there's no more promise to pay, folks. We have a fiat currency based by decree only, okay? Now, if you look at this really, I don't know if the camera's going to be able to pick this up, but you're going to see 2 signatures down at the bottom here. And one's going to say Secretary of the Treasury, and the other one's going to say Treasury of the United States. Well, aren't they the same position? No. This is a note. This is a mortgage. There is a debtor and there is a creditor on this instrument, okay? That's why there's two signatures. One is the representative, Secretary of the Treasury. Secretary of the Treasury of who? Of the Federal Reserve Private Bank. And the other, Treasury of the United States, is the debtor. We understand that? Now you can get your own dollar, your own Federal Reserve note. Excuse me. That's one ploy on language. We shouldn't be calling this a dollar, because we've just proven it's not. It's an instrument of debt. And you can look this up for yourself. Now, at some point, folks, in future shows, we are going to get into quite elaborately all the symbolisms on this instrument. And you're going to find little things that you're going to find absolutely shocking. And I know you're not going to be able to see it on the camera here, but if you wish to look up in the little corner here, you're going to see Moltar. And if you go back, you're going to find Moltar was a Babylonian deity, and that's one reason why it's here. And then also, if you want to go on the back here, and we'll, again, going to get into this in future shows, Novus Ordo Seclorum. If you're a novice in something, what are you? You're new. Ordo, order. Seclorum is where we get the word secular from. The word secular means of the world, of the age. New order of the world. Right there on an instrument that you falsely believe is the United States dollar, but happens to be a private script from a private foreign bank. Okay? So you must understand, folks, what we have and what we don't have. We do not have intrinsic value in our money. We do not have control of our money system. And this is the reason why I use the example of my mother in 1964 buying a house for $14,000. And 3 years ago, that house, with no additions, just regular required maintenance, is now worth $300,000. Is the difference that the house grew in value? No. The difference being it took more of them worthless pieces of paper to buy the same entity because of the devaluation of what we call the dollar. See, inflation is a hidden tax. It's a controllable hidden tax. And this is where we are. I can see we're not going to have all the time to get into this, but let's go as far as we can, and then we'll continue next week. You heard me mention a couple of things about fractional money. Well, let's listen to what fractional money. Fractional money is paper money which is backed by precious metals up to only a portion of the face amount. It is a hybrid, being part receipt money and part fiat money. Again, fiat based by decree, okay, and receipt money meaning it has intrinsic value. There's something backing it up, okay. So if you're going to think of fractional money, it's exactly what it is. You know how a fraction, 2/3, 1/2, whatever. One portion of it has intrinsic value backing it up, and the other is by the king's decree that we have to use this, okay? Generally, the public is unaware of this fact and believes that fractional money can be redeemed in full at any time. We've just demonstrated to you it can't. When the truth is discovered, as periodically happens, there are runs on the bank, and only the first few depositors in line can be paid. Folks, you got to understand, there's fractional money and there's a fractional banking system. Okay, and next show, we obviously don't have time to get into this. Next show, we'll get into this in more depth. But a fractional banking system operates the following manner. If I'm the banker, I'm allowed to put out loans at, say, a 90 or a 50 or a 10% backing. In other words, if it's 10%, for every dollar I lend, I have to have a dime, a real dime, of intrinsic value backing that up. Okay, we started out where it was 100%. Okay, then we went down to 74. Went down to 80, then 74. Then we went down to the 50s. Then we went down to the 60s. Then we went down to 25. Then we went down to 10. Then we went down to 8. Then we went down to 4. And guess where we are today, folks? 2. We operate on a 2% fractional banking system. What does that mean to you? That means to you that for every dollar your bank lends out, they got 2 cents backing it up. So you better keep your eye out for a bank run. You remember when Y2K happened and Mr. Greenspan said, well, we estimate that only 2% of the American people are going to take their money out of the bank. Do you want to know why they had that estimate? Because he knew They were on a fractional banking system, obviously, being the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and that only 2% were going to get their money out of the bank if all what we call money was put back into circulation. That's how he got that figure. Remember Ronald Reagan, his first press conference, inflation was at 21%. The prime rate was at 21%. And Ronald Reagan said, they asked him what he was going to do about the inflation. You know what Ronald Reagan said? He said, "There's nothing I can do. I am merely the President of the United States." What was he telling the American people? The President, the Congress does not control the money system. A foreign banking cabal does. You know it as the Federal Reserve. Okay, so when the truth is discovered, as periodically happens, there are runs on the bank, and the only first few deposits can line up and be paid. Why is that, folks? We're on a 2% fractional banking system, okay? Since fractional money earns just as much interest for the bankers as does gold and silver, the temptation is great for them to create as much of it as possible. Wow, look where we are today. As this happens, the fraction will represent the reserve becomes smaller and smaller until eventually it is reduced to zero. What's the law read about this? Fractional money will always degenerate into fiat money, and fiat money is fiat money in transition. Okay? So, what's fiat money? Fiat money is paper money without precious metal backing and which people are required by law to accept. It allows politicians to increase spending without raising taxes. Fiat money is the cause of inflation. Oh, let's stop right there. Fiat money is the cause of inflation. And let me finish this and I'll get into that. And the amount of which people lose in purchasing power is exactly the amount which was taken from them and transferred to the government by this process of inflation. Inflation, therefore, is a hidden tax. Okay? This tax is the most unfair of all because it falls most heavily upon those who are at least able to pay, the small wage earner, and those on fixed incomes. It also punishes the thrifty by eroding the value of their savings. This creates resentment among the people, leading always to political unrest and national disunity. A nation that resorts to the use of fiat money has doomed itself to economic hardship and political disunity. So this is, folks, we're running out of time, and please come back for the next show. We're going to get into this and quite heavily with regards to what history has shown in the course of events that have taken place. It's also going to demonstrate the events of today. You know, like we've been talking about, these international bankers have gotten $14.6 trillion of your. Now, again, I can't put that figure together, but what it means to me is the labors of yourself and the labors of future children of this country to pay this. And how do they make it? They make it out of thin air. There's nothing backing it up. It's by decree. It's being forced down your throat to accept. Folks, I thank you so much for watching. And we do ask you to research everything that we've demonstrated to you today. And we want you to remember, number one, that the Federal Reserve is a private banking cabal. And number two, that your government is your responsibility. And we thank you for watching.